Heated Rivalry has been really good at opening up a bigger conversation about queer athletes. Heated Rivalry has been really good at creating conversations about queerness within sport. Despite all the background noise, they still want each other because these two really should not be compatible. I'm finding it really interesting how people say that Shane fell first. And I'm thinking, did you guys not watch the same show as me? Hello, everybody. How are you doing? Hope you're well, safe, hydrated, well rested, and everything in between. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Jord. And for those of you who do know me, good afternoon, good morning. What are you saying? Did you miss me? Because I missed you. Guys, I'm really excited. So this has been very highly requested, very highly anticipated. And today we are going to be talking about Heated Rivalry. Now, I feel like I have so many thoughts on this show, to the point I don't know where to even begin. I'm really appreciating, and it's a catch-22, yeah, because I'm kind of appreciating how the reception exceeded expectations, right? So it's like obviously reached a global scale. But then the other half of me is kind of thinking, have a bit more faith in queer talent, have a bit more faith in queer storytelling. But yeah, because this got released, just for context, in case you can't tell, I live in the UK, I'm British. So this got released last Monday in the UK. And I believe prior to that, it got released in Canada and the other places late November, early December. So it's been like a minute, like a minute for like pop culture and releases, etc. But I think because obviously people are continually discovering the show, the conversations just aren't dying, which I love because it's a great show. None of the actors in it really have like excessive exposure, so it's a great opportunity for them to really debut their careers as actors. There's a lot of benefits from the longevity of this press run, this press release, and this promo. It's great. I want to talk about it. Like, I think obviously like there's such an absence in like queer media and queer representation for a whole. So like just to see anything is pretty monumental, I would say, and I feel like I'm also kind of leaning more towards it now because these boys are older, like as in like they're meant to be in their mid-20s, whereas before when I was watching shows about like teenage boys, it was cute and I'll probably still watch them if they come out, but I just need like a bit more. Do you get? I need like a wider variation, But yeah, let's get into it. I think the way I want to talk about it is I want to talk about my thoughts, what I liked, what I didn't like, and we'll go from there. Pretty sweet. So obviously this relationship, this entanglement, this very long-term situationship is between two ice hockey players, two very prominent ice hockey players, captains of their team ice hockey players. So we have Shane and we have Ilya. Shane plays for Montreal and Ilya plays for Boston. So these teams are rivalries, right? So I think naturally there's meant to be a bit of competitiveness, a bit of drama, a bit of tension between the two, which is why I think this story is even more well received because the pairing was so unexpected. Even like from the jump, when we look at how they interact with each other, like initially, even like Shane is very like happy to when they first meet, right? Shane is very happy to introduce himself, to say hello. Ilya gives next to nothing. He's very minimal, very restricted. He really isn't giving him much. And to be fair to Shane, I would have given up at that point until like I think he goes to walk off and Ilya says something like, "Oh, we're gonna beat you" or something like that, even though he does beat them. And yeah, I think that's why people resonated with it so much because it's you just wouldn't put them together, like Shane's very reserved, very shy, very introverted. Ilya's more like Jack the Lag, quite hyper mask, kind of exaggerates a lot. You don't really get the depth from the beginning. But like, with that being said though, I'm finding it really interesting how people say that Shane fell first. And I'm thinking, did you guys not watch the same show as me? Ilya is the one who asked for Shane to be in the commercial. Ilya is the one who made the move in the shower. Ilya's the one who made the move on the bike. I think because Ilya can be quite abrupt and quite reserved, people misunderstood that and didn't appreciate that there's a lot of actions that Ilya put in place from the jump, from early on, which made it very clear that he initially had more interest than Shane did, right? And also you have to like appreciate the different levels of experiences, right? I believe in the book it says that Shane has dated or been with men before, but I don't think that is the case in the show. Whereas Ilya has had experiences with the coach's son, Sasha, I believe his name is, you know? So there's a kind of inevitable power dynamic already, you know. Ilya knows what to do, he's experienced, whereas Shane's kind of going along with it as it comes, you know. See what I did there? D. The pair of them are also very different compared to like their environments. I think that's a really crucial thing that needs to be mentioned and recognized. When we look at, okay, even if we look at their families, for example, Shane's family are very supportive. They're very full on. I think the dad is quite passive and quite reserved, but Shane's mum is very much like she's very much in business mode. You know, she's very much in she's very much, I would call her she's very much in like hustler mode, you know, she's very like money orientated, whereas the dad's just there chilling. But I think because the dad has his own career, I believe, but I think Shane's mum is his manager, you know, so I don't think there's really much consideration or appreciation for the most part about personal life. I think there's some mention at one point about them going to Wimbledon and there being like a Swedish princess or something like that, even though I believe at this point they are conscious or like suspicious that Shane is gay. But yeah, but I think, and also I think maybe it can be argued that like the space wasn't given for Shane to be gay or to feel comfortable enough to tell his mum that he's gay, you know? When you look at Ilya, obviously his dad has dementia, and I feel like the impression that I got is that nothing that he ever does is enough, which is crazy because he is like the breadwinner for his entire family. His brother is also like an absolute like idiot. But then like it's interesting because I think to myself, does the brother know he's gay? Because the brother uses the F slur quite a lot. Like the brother uses the F slur quite a lot. And it makes me think, is the brother aware or is that just like a common like insult? Do you know what I mean? But yeah, when you compare the two, even though Shane's parents aren't really that focused on his actual personal life and circumstances, you can tell that the care and the love that they have for him is a lot more sincere and a lot more genuine compared to Ilya's dad and brother. You know, Ilya's dad is very much like, Ilya's dad is quite pressurizing. Like, not being funny, Ilya is international famous hockey player who makes a stupid amount of money, but like they're just it's never enough. Like when he loses one of the games and then has to leave the tournament, but then meets someone in Russia, I can't remember who it is, someone in some sort of power, and the dad's like, you should be disappointed, but for some reason he still wants to meet you. And I just think, give the guy a break. And I think having those pressures on top of the other issues which he's dealing with, it just gets a bit too much. And I think it is somewhat justifiable why Ilya can be quite stubborn, can be quite reserved. Because initially I thought, why are you being so difficult? Initially I thought he's being really cold. But then as you like dive into the backstory, I'm like, do you know what? Fair. I get it. I actually get it. So we're going to talk about what I like and what I didn't. I did appreciate and I did like how it wasn't rushed. Like, okay, I think the sexual attraction is there from the jump, you know. I think initially we can tell very early on that there's some sort of chemistry. And it's really interesting because I'm thinking, what inkling did Ilya have to figure out that Shane was into him? Because like, I think he just thought F it. I genuinely just think Ilya said F it because obviously they were having the shower, right? They were having the shower and he just turns around and just starts doing, you know what? And then apparently, and then I think I saw this thing online saying how apparently when they had the scene with the bikes and the water bottle, Ilya purposely puts the bottle by his crouch to see if Shane will look. But I think it's in a way that it is kind of like, obviously, like there has to be boundaries and all of that, but it is kind of like hot how like direct Ilya is, you know, like just like really wanting someone in that moment. Because I think like as a queer person, sometimes you have to just be like, oh, fuck it. And I don't mean like obviously moving mad, but like trying to be a bit flirtatious or trying to be a bit forward to get like a vibe, you know, because obviously if he didn't take that risk, he would have never found out that Shane was gay and then nothing would have ever happened. Do you know what I mean? I'm so glad that I watched Heated Rivalry alone. I'm certain, right? Some of the scenes I was watching, I'm positive, like, if anyone was, like, near my room or living room, I'm certain it sounded like I was watching. But I'm here for it. I love it. And it's like the bit, you know, the bit, yeah, where, like, they're both, like, passing the water bottle back and forth. And then Ilya is, like, staring at Shane and goes, more. Hot. It's just really sexy, like someone just like wanting you there and then and just being seductive. And it's quite, and I guess with the clash of the culture and the Russian culture and like the norms and values and all of that and the principles, it's really interesting to see how like he just quite clearly doesn't care, you know? It's quite admirable. Like there's a lot of moments where we see Ilya and he just doesn't care. It's like when they're like on the rooftop and he just starts kissing him and Shane's like, what if someone sees us, you know? Yeah, in Heated Rivalry, if we look at it from a culture perspective, Shane is better off. Obviously Shane is Canadian, right? Canadian Japanese, right? And Canada is one of the most accepting queer accepting countries for queerness in the world. I think Canada was the first country in North America to legalize same-sex marriage, you know? And I think Japan is pretty, I don't know the stats exactly, but I'm pretty sure Japan is pretty high up with regards to level of acceptance and openness when it comes to queerness, right? Whereas Russia is like one of the most homophobic countries in the world. You know, I don't think it's illegal to be gay in Russia, but I think it's very frowned upon. Like, I think it's one of those ones where like you can do it like behind closed doors, which is the case for a lot of countries. But it's interesting. It's interesting to watch and to see that contrast. Yet when we watch it from a viewer's perspective from the jump, Ilya is definitely the one who is more forward. But then maybe that's just because he feels comfortable in Canada. I don't know. But yeah, I like how they didn't rush into it. Like this was, in my opinion, this was a very long situationship. I don't think I could do a situationship for as long as Ilya and Shane. 9 years, that's a bit crazy still. Like I appreciate like not even a couple of years, even 9 months would be a bit too much. But I do like that because I think it gave them a lot of time to like develop their feelings, understand each other. Because when we look in the earlier episodes in the earlier years, it's very much like splash and dash. It's very much like hit it and bounce. Whereas when we reach about halfway through, the dynamic changes, you know, they're actually having conversations. Ilya is asking Shane to stay over. They're talking, they're getting emotional with each other. You know, there's a very natural, slow paced shift. And I think that's really important to understand that, like, sometimes with hookups or sometimes with relationships, you don't get that, like, ignition or that spark from the jump. And I think it's really important to hold on to that because I think a lot of people put pressure on how a relationship or an encounter should be really good from the beginning, but it's just not always the case. It's not always the case, babe. I really appreciate and I really love how one of the characters isn't white. Just feel like I get obviously like it is written in the book that Shane is East Asian, but I just feel like there's so much white queer men are so dominating when it comes to our space. So it's just really nice. And it like when we look back as well, I think it's like such great representation because there really isn't that much mainstream representation for East Asian queer people. And I think Hunter has made a really good job of that, you know. I think this is going to be a staple and the beginning of a lot of East Asian POC representation for main characters. I feel like it tends to be for queer people that their characters tend to be side characters, you know. Main characters seems to be a real rarity. So I'm really excited to see this expand, and I'm really excited for Hunter. I'm excited for Hunter and his career. But there's like a lot of mention as well in the show how like there aren't many like Asian hockey players, and that kind of opens up like another conversation, right? Kind of opens up another conversation about how like representation is so important. Do you get it? Like Shane is monumental to so many people, and like representation obviously like is something that I talk about quite a lot because it's so important, but like we still need it, you know. Like I'm 26, right? There's no amount of representation that I can do for the rest of my life that will equate to white gay people, you know. So it needs to be a constant cycle, a constant run, a constant on the go procedure. Do you know what I mean? Because I think the mum mentions it, because the mum mentions it pretty early on. She says, "Oh, like so many kids would love to be in your position. So many kids are inspired by you," and that can be quite. And I think in a way also, though, saying that, and I feel for Shane because that can be quite pressurizing. There isn't really that much conversation about race, and I think I would really like to see a conversation between Ilya and Shane regarding race or comparing cultures, because it's very much about, from what I gathered, it was very much about Ilya saying how he can't go back to Russia if he does certain things, how Russia isn't accepting. But it would be really nice to unpack a conversation where Shane talks more about his culture. But I don't know if that's because he feels comfortable and therefore it's not really necessary. I don't know. I guess we'll see. One thing I really love that, like, despite all the background noise, they still want each other, because these two really should not be compatible. They should not be together. Like, their teams are literal rivalries. You know, they do so much to try and prevent this happening. You know, Shane gets a girlfriend, which is a bit crazy. Love her though. Oh, she's such a slay. She's an icon. I adore her. Hope she's in season 2. You know, Ilya's bisexual, so I guess like the spectrum's a bit more open, whereas he has the opportunity or the luxury even to be able to dabble with women, whereas quite clearly Shane can, but it's not enjoyable for Shane, you know. So it's not really worth the hassle, is it? And obviously, like, they're very sneaky. Like, they have no choice but to be quite sneaky. Like, you'll see it where like they're having a game or they finish a game and they'll whisper to each other, "Oh, I'm in room so and so," you know. And even when they're together, it's very much like having to like tiptoe around to ensure that no one catches them, you know. But it's interesting because you watch the shift, yeah, and then when it gets to like the end, the later episodes, their affection is just so blatant. The dad even says it in the final episode when they did the match. I can't think of when the match was, but when they did the one particular match, the chemistry was like inevitable, was very noticeable, you know. And I think it becomes even more noticeable when one of the players from Boston bumps into Shane, and Shane obviously like damages his face, and you can see that Ilya is getting very distressed, asking if he's okay, and then he goes to the hospital. You know, Ilya years ago wouldn't have done that, and I think it just shows how like they're unable to not show how they feel for each other, which is hot. I love affection. We get to watch the relationship blossom. I didn't, because as someone who didn't read the book and had no previous knowledge, I didn't think we would get to the position we were. I didn't think we'd get to a point where like they were literally in a cottage together, spending like actual time together. One of the like, do you know what? There's a lot of hype about episode 5, which I get because I love episode 5. I think it's like one of the highest rated episodes of all time or something like that. But I really loved episode 4. The episode 4, yeah, where Shane visits Ilya. Ilya asks him to stay over. It's so beautiful. I think that's Ilya showing a bit more vulnerability. I think that's him like subtly like saying to Shane, "I want you, stay over. I want you with me." And then even then, like you'd think, I thought at that point in the morning he'll be like, "Okay, you need to go." And then obviously he's like, "Oh, like I'm making food. Do you want food?" It's just like these really subtle signs of comfort, you know, comfort. And it's taken a long time for them to get there. And it's just so nice to see how this relationship blossoms. Obviously, it goes a bit south because Shane panics and leaves. But I think Shane leaves because he doesn't. I think he knows it's getting a bit too real, and he doesn't know how to deal with it. Which is interesting because we've gone from Ilya, even though he is the one initiating it from the jump, Ilya is quite abrupt from the beginning, and Ilya can be quite hot and cold. Like there's like a point where like he like and I don't really like this part makes me quite sad, where like he like ignores Shane for months, and then like they meet in the toilet and Ilya just says to Shane, "I want you to suck my dick." I'm like, but Shane falls for that one. That was a bad move. But yeah, it's nice watching the relationship blossom. I'm just here for it. I just love queer love, man. I'm obsessed with Shane's parents. I love how well they took it. I mean, there was never any indication or inkling that they weren't going to accept it. And even like when Shane's dad catches Shane and Ilya at the cottage, when he goes back, he doesn't even say anything. I mean, that's how I interpreted it. He didn't even say anything, right? And I think the parents are just upset that they didn't create a space where Shane felt comfortable enough to talk about it. I really loved the scene between Shane and his mum, you know? Like it's very intimate, it's very beautiful. And again, the mum just feels bad that she quite clearly didn't make a space that made Shane feel comfortable enough to talk to her. And it's when she says to her, I'm so sorry you didn't feel like you could come to me. And again, I think Shane's mum obviously does love him. Like, you can't deny that. But I think she's so focused on like creating income and money and opportunities for Shane. She didn't really consider and focus on his personal life. But the parents do say, when they sit down with Shane and Ilya, they do say to like Shane, we did think you were gay. We thought it was a possibility. Parents know, especially mothers. And they're right, mum. But yeah, I love that conversation, and it's so casual and so nice, you know. They're so warm and so opening from the beginning. Like they make him a coffee, they make Ilya a coffee. Even they make him a coffee. No, they make him some pasta. They give him a vodka. They're planning to have dinner afterwards. You know, it's just lush. Like it's just nice. It's just like the perfect response. There was no like. I think for so long in culture and media, the response has always been angry, aggressive, and I'm like, it doesn't need to be like that. Like it can be cool, it can be chill, it can be happy. You know, like let's just roll it back. Let's be optimistic. I also really loved the dynamic between Scott and Kip. I think Scott is so sexy. Kip is a lucky boy. And I know these lot are actors, yeah, but even getting to lip someone, that fit is just nice. Do you know what I mean? Their interaction, again, is quite natural because natural and just a coincidence. Just coincidental that Scott happened to be in the area going to a cafe where Kip works, where they're introduced to each other. Then he keeps going back for these smoothies that he can't miss out on, which then leads to him obviously inviting him to the hockey match. Nothing appears from that. And then thankfully, because coincidences just seem to be so fortunate in this show, they meet at a fundraiser that Kip's working at. And then to which then Scott asks Kip to come back to his, and then it just goes from there. You know, I think and like they're interesting because like even though when you compare it to Ilya and Shane, right, Scott is like super affectionate, maybe not always publicly, but he's always affectionate in person, you know, always does the most, always treats him, always like there's never any. I have like doubts sometimes whether like Ilya and Shane have feel a certain way towards each other. I didn't ever have doubts about Kip and Scott, you know? And obviously, like it goes south where like Scott isn't ready to come out for whatever reason. I think it's embedded in sport culture and hockey culture. But then like when we fast forward and we see that part where Scott wins the match and then brings Kip onto the ice rink, and then just thinks F it. Very good redemption. I wasn't on Team Scott until then. I was on Team Scott because he's sexy. I left Team Scott because he treated my Kip badly. And then I was back on Team Scott when he did that. And that's also a really important part. Like Scott publicly showing his love for Kip is what leads to Ilya staying with Shane. I don't know if Ilya would have stayed with Shane and told Shane he loved him if Scott didn't do that. And it's amazing how like one action can lead on to another, you know? Heated Rivalry has been really good at opening up a bigger conversation about queer athletes. Heated Rivalry has been really good at creating conversations about queerness within sport. Because when we look at it from like a stat point, it's not logical. It doesn't make sense. There are no outplayers in the National Hockey League at all, or even from a UK perspective, right? There are over 500 players that play in the Premier League in football in the UK, and there isn't a single person that is out as LGBTQ. Statistically, that actually doesn't work. I think culture embedded for sport and for athletes is very heavily associated with heteronormativity and with being straight, right? I don't think the culture is accepting or gives people the allowance to be queer, right? Because 500 players, you're telling me there's not at least like 10% of them that like men. Statistically, it doesn't make sense. And I think because the culture is so embedded and so traditional, it's almost like communicated to you that like being out or being outwardly queer has consequences on your career, has consequences on your success. I think we're in a really awkward time where we need people to come out, to be the first, to allow it to inspire others. I do remember seeing something though that said how like 2 players in the Premier League were together, and it was going to get revealed, but I don't know why it didn't. But I think, to be fair, if anyone in the press wanted to release it, they would get sued a lot of money. I just think we need to do better. I think being queer shouldn't have an effect or have a consequence on your career. If you're good at the game, you're good at the game. Do you get it? But apparently, though, ever since the show's come out, a lot of like closeted athletes have come forward and contacted Hudson and Connor, which is great. I feel like they may not be the most appropriate people to be contacting because they're not hockey players. But that is nice, though, And I think even for them to feel comfortable enough to talk to them is pretty severe, pretty substantial, pretty amazing, to be perfectly honest. So I'm going to talk about what I didn't like. If I'm being completely honest, I feel like Ilya only really like made like the shift and the move because things weren't going well at home. Like I feel like if Ilya's dad was still alive, he wouldn't have gone to the cottage. He wouldn't be with Shane. He wouldn't have told Shane he loved him. I don't like the idea that like things have to go crashing down for Ilya for that to make him and Shane happen. I feel like I would have a lot more, and this is obviously just my take, I feel like I would have a lot more respect and a lot more admiration if it didn't take a dad dying and other background noise to happen for him to then come forward. And it makes me think, if the relationship with Ilya's brother was good, would that affect things as well? Obviously, like I love the story and I love them, but I just don't really rate how it seems like he has to. It's almost like everything else has gone south, and it kind of, in a little low-key way, seems like Shane's a backup. Do you know what I mean? Like Shane should be the priority, but that's just how I perceived it. I feel quite sad at the fact that it feels like Ilya doesn't really have any friends. Like, when I think of Shane, Shane is obviously very good friends with Hayden. And like Hayden obviously like will say how like the wife has like friends that'll be interested, but like doesn't really push it too much, And he has that other friend whose name I can't remember, but I remember they're like, I can't actually think of where they are, but they're in a cafe. It's okay. I actually can't think of what his name is, but basically there's a friend, right? It's Shane, Scott, and the friend, and they're sat in a cafe, right? And basically Shane is going to watch one of his friends play, and then they're in Russia. Yes, they're in Russia. I remember they're in Russia. And the one friend says to Shane, "Oh, it's pretty brave of your friend doing that." And Shane says, "Well, why is that?" Is because he's gay. Like, it's mad respectful because of the way that Russia is. And you can see the way that Scott and Shane both like pull a face, right? And I think even though obviously that isn't like massive allyship and is like the basic minimum, that is like, again, an inkling that Shane's friends are supportive. And even though Hayden doesn't really like outwardly say anything to support or whatever, it's very it's very apparent that he will love him regardless. Obviously, like Shane and Ilya have each other in each other's phones as Jane and Lily, you know, and it's quite funny because even though they have it as that, Ilya's mistress, who he's been seeing for X amount of years, knows that Jane is. And then Shane's girlfriend, Rose, is very much like, you'd rather be kissing a boy. And you know what? Shout out to Rose, to be fair, because I wouldn't be like annoyed or mad or surprised if Rose was like, do you know what, Shane, f you. I think Rose took it the best way possible, but then she was like, I do musical theatre or something like that, so most of my boyfriends leave me for boys, which is a bit rough, but Rose is pretty. But yeah, obviously if you're gay, innit? But yeah, it feels more like, it doesn't feel like Ilya has anyone that he can really talk to apart from Shane. I believe that Shane has his friends and his friends would be there. And it'll be interesting to see how the next few seasons pan out and what that support system looks like. But yeah, it just really isn't, it's not the same for Ilya, in my opinion. I was also quite confused by Scott. Like, obviously, love Scott. Scott's gorgeous. Scott is sexy. But like, it's weird because obviously I get that he's not outright, but there are some moments where I don't really understand how he can be the way he is and then the way he isn't. So Scott is obviously very full on behind closed doors, very flirtatious, very affectionate. I get that. And then you see the scene where they go to like look at some art and he's like literally covering himself, but like, which I get, like, let it land, I get it. But then you have it where like he's very, very, very flirtatious when he's getting his smoothies. Do you know what I mean? And he's out in public. He's still publicly seen. I don't know if it's maybe because Kip's working. It's a different type of like environment, establishment. But I don't really understand how you can go from one extremity to another. And who's to say they can't just be friends? You know, I don't really understand Scott's way of thinking. But I do appreciate that when you are in that position, you probably are like on a high level of paranoia. But yeah, I don't know. I just thought it was really interesting and like a bit confusing how he can be so affectionate in one and not in another. Because the thing is, right, like, I feel like a lot of people need to appreciate you can just be friends with someone who's gay. Or, do you know what I mean? I remember, right, in my dating DL days, I remember when I was like 20, I was dating this guy and he was a bit younger, but 18, 19, 18. And I remember we went out, right, and we went to pay for parking, and he like the guy like froze, and I was like, "What's the issue?" He's like, "Oh, my neighbour's like near us or behind us or whatever." And in my head, I thought, "But we're not doing anything. We looked like friends." And I remember saying to him when I was on the date, I was like, "Do you think we look like a couple?" He was like, "No, do you?" I was like, "Oh, Jesus, don't go for the DLs, guys. It doesn't end well." And I do kind of understand, obviously, it's hot, like someone wanting you in that moment. For a lot of this did give me like a low-key bit of like PTSD with like DL men, you know, how these men are like so overly affectionate when no one's around, and then they treat you like a stranger when you're in a public setting, you know. That was that was a cute reminder. Thank you, Crave. I feel like, I don't know if I'm gonna get like hit for this. I feel like sometimes it is just like too sexual, right? And I'm so for the scene, I'm so for the sex scenes, I'm so for skin and skin, I'm so for them having a good time. But I feel like for a lot of it, sometimes I just want a bit of dialogue. Sometimes I just want to hear a bit more about what's going on. Do you know what I mean? Like, and sometimes I actually find, obviously I get it initially because initially in the first few episodes, first few years, it is just based on like sexual chemistry. I completely understand that. That makes perfect sense. But then as we move on, I'm just like, why are we still moving this way? Like, the bit that really annoyed me, right, was the part where they're in the cottage, Shane and Ilya. Hayden has called Shane. Shane's trying to have a conversation and Ilya's just there playing with him. Like, please, just let him have the effing phone call, you know? It just, yeah, that annoyed me. That was on my list. But I think sometimes Ilya being overly sexual is a alternative to him talking about his feelings, you know? Like, Ilya actually says to Shane at one point, "You talk too much. You ask too many questions." But I think that's where Shane is quite clearly trying to get a bit more of an insight to Ilya, whereas Ilya is like very much like, keep it surface level, keep it fun, keep it bouncy. Like, let's not talk about feelings, because and obviously when he does talk about feelings, it is very, very deep, very deep. So I'm like, do you know what? I hear it, I get it, I appreciate it. So yeah, I wish there was more insight into like what it's like to be a gay hockey player. because there's the three of them who are like scared as anything, right? Shane, Ilya, and Scott. But like nothing really, there's no good reasoning as to why they actually are so fearful. Okay, granted, there's minimal, next to none minor representation in hockey, right, for them to look up to and to aspire to. But like, I would have really liked for there to have been, I don't know, maybe like an ex-hockey player that was like ridiculed by the press or ridiculed by the industry. So they had a reason as to why they feel the way they did. I get obviously that the tradition is rooted and that is why they feel a certain way. But I just think it doesn't really make sense. Ilya, I kind of get because Russia is obviously very anti-LGBTQ+. So that makes a bit more sense. But I don't know. I just kind of wish there was something to go on, something a bit more concrete. You know, like I would love for there to be a bit where like the coach like makes a comment about like gay people or makes like a cuss about gay people. Not because I want that, but because it would add like a layer. It would add like an extra level of understanding as to why these players feel that they aren't able to come out and why it would jeopardize their career. Okay, so my highlights. I loved the scene with Shane and his mum. I thought it was beautiful. I thought it was very heartwarming. I think that would have really resonated with a lot of queer people, you know. One of the most difficult conversations people tend to have when they're coming out is the conversation they have with their parents. The person who probably knows the most, but you feel the most scared to say to them, you know? I think it was a beautiful conversation. I loved the shots. I loved the focus. I loved the intimacy. I just thought it was gorgeous. I thought it was done really, really well. I just loved Scott and Kip. I love the scene in episode 5 where Ilya is telling Shane how much he loves him, but it's in Russian, so obviously he doesn't know what's going on. I think that was like a real major milestone for Ilya. You know, I don't think he wanted to acknowledge that he loved Shane because, you know, culture, other implications, yada yada. And I just think episode 5 was like a real demonstration of growth. You know, I think for so long, even though Ilya definitely wanted Shane before Shane wanted Ilya, I think for so long he's been so good at like keeping the distinction between it being purely sexual and an emotional investment. And it's gone to the point where they've been spending time together. They've been having sex on and off for 9 years. 9 years. That's a long time. You know, I think he just reached a point where he was like, I just don't care anymore. You know, and I love the scene. I have to really give Connor creds for learning Russian because not only does he, I mean, not that I understand it at all, but like, not only does he obviously learn Russian, he does it with so much passion. He does it with so much passion and so much oomph. You know, like not to discredit, obviously, because I think it's so impressive, but like. Obviously, as someone who doesn't speak Russian, I wouldn't even need to understand what he's saying because there's so much passion and so much power behind the dialogue. It really does land, you know? And I think showing that switch, that versatility, really will really pave Connor in a really positive light. You know, and I'm so excited to see where this show goes. I'm so happy that it's been well received. I'm so happy it's been renewed for another 2 seasons. We need more queer storytelling. You know, Heated Rivalry is a staple in queer culture. You know, I hope this opens up more storytelling for queer people across the board, without a doubt. Yeah. So, guys, hope you enjoyed my chit chat. My name is Jord Hellwood. This is the Winning Side Podcast, Heated Rivalry Edition. Please let me know your comments and your thoughts, and I hope to speak to you soon.